Today we're going to talk a little bit about the Blue Card program. But before we get started, I do want to acknowledge I'm currently situated in Vancouver, which is the traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nation. We have our international rugby tournament, the Vancouver Sevens, coming up this weekend, and we had the New Zealand All Blacks come to Tsleil-Waututh Nation yesterday, and what an impactful event and an opportunity to learn, and it made me really grateful that I'm able to learn, grow, and play on this land. So the plan for today, we're going to talk about the Blue Card. We'll talk a little bit about where we are, where we were, and how we got to where we're going. And then we'll talk a little bit about next steps, and we'll pitch it across to Mike as well to talk a little bit about some of the research that we've done in this space. So we're going to tell the story of a fictitious rugby player, Dallas. So in this instance, Dallas has been tackled. They've hit their head on the ground, showed signs and symptoms of a concussion. Pre-Blue Card, because of the World Rugby Concussion Management program, coaches would be aware of what they should do, and they would remove Dallas from the field of play. Dallas would then return to the field of play following the graduated return to play program through World Rugby, which in this example would be fantastic. And we know that this isn't what happens all the time, but in a perfect world, that's what would happen before we had the Blue Card. But it did lead to a number of questions. Like, how do we know if an athlete is returning safely? Who decides if they're ready to return? What's that process to return? And how do we provide that best care to that community rugby player in Canada? So we didn't have to go too far to fill the gap. In rugby in New Zealand and Australia, they had the Blue Card, which is a process to return athletes to the field of play in a safe manner. So in 2019, we ran a pilot in Ontario, and which was closely tied to Rowan's Law. And in that pilot, we ran the Blue Card in the senior competitions for the men and women in the GTA. So after that Blue Card process, again, a number of questions. Is the process that we have in place right for the administrators? Is it something that we're able to implement from the club level to the coaches to the administrators in the provincial unions? Do we have the right training for those individuals? What does that process look like, and can we improve it? Are there some gaps that we have? And one of the biggest questions we had, because we were putting the match official at the center, holding up a Blue Card to recognize that a player is being removed from the match, we wanted to understand how they were feeling, and that's where we brought Mike in from a research side of things. So, Mike, I'll pitch it across to you.
Great. And first, from the research side of things, I want to acknowledge the role CERC played to help provide funding for this through the CERC Research Practitioner Match Grant. Basically, with the Blue Card, it's clear that match officials play a primary role as the initiators of that process. And we also identify that they're often pretty overlooked population when it comes to sport injury and concussion research sort of more broadly. And so for this reason, we wanted to explore their experiences managing concussion injuries, and specifically with the implementation of the Blue Card following that 2019 pilot process. And so to do this, we conducted some online one-on-one interviews with registered match officials in Ontario. So those who would have gone through this process with the pilot. Our sample included 19 participants, 5 of whom completed an initial interview as well as a follow-up interview where we discussed their initial responses sort of in greater detail. Looking at who participated, participants identified primarily as male, 2 participants identified as female, and 1 participant identified as non-binary. And just for reference, female match officials account for about 18% of match officials registered with Rugby Ontario, so we weren't quite representative of that. But a pretty diverse sample overall. In terms of experience and demographics, our sample had a pretty wide range of experience. We had 10 level 1 certifications. So this is typically they would be involved at the junior level, 4 level 2 certifications. So at the senior competition, provincial, and perhaps university level type competitions, and 3 level 3 certified match officials who would typically be our national panel referees. And a pretty wide range, age range and experience, both as a match official and within rugby more broadly. One thing that came up in our interviews is that despite having completed concussion-specific training, such as the World Rugby modules that Ryan had mentioned, several match officials still held misstated knowledge or misperceptions about the injury and described varying levels of confidence in their ability to manage it. So if we're onboarding this new protocol, that's something that we had definitely flagged. For their knowledge, some match officials were still referring to different grades of concussions. There was some confusion around or a belief that sitting in a dark, quiet room was a key part of the recovery process. And even though the match officials with the blue card aren't directly involved in rehabilitation, it's important to recognize that they're also players, they're also parents, they're also coaches themselves. And we wanted to ensure that everyone has a general understanding of how this process goes. Misperceptions reflected a strong belief in the utility of baseline, even though it's not currently recommended at the community level. And confidence levels varied, where older and more experienced match officials were very, very confident in their understanding of the injury, even though they were often the ones that held these misperceptions and dated knowledge. So a bit of a knowledge gap there. Speaking to specific match official concerns, referee abuse, match officials described experiences of receiving abuse from athletes, coaches, parents, and spectators all around the decision to manage game situations following a blue card where a player was removed from a game due to a suspected concussion. So a pretty big concern there. They also reported having concerns for liability. How are they protected from a liability standpoint? And a common comment was, what happens if I make the wrong call? And the last part was concerns around athletes and coaches trying to sort of game the system around the blue card, so they don't have to follow and adhere to the process. And one example that was given was, for instance, a tournament where multiple games are played on the same day. And so flagging an athlete's profile with a blue card doesn't really apply or keep them out of subsequent competitions within that tournament. And for anyone who's organized a tournament, we know it can all be pretty chaotic on the day. So that was, again, another big concern for us. The last piece is just a few key takeaways here. One was around standard practices. We want to ensure where possible there's consistency between different levels of competition, like high school and club and university. This is something that the match officials had brought up, particularly those who refereed at the university and high school level, where the blue card is not currently utilized, as well as some language. Younger match officials brought up the notion of a sort of standard pregame script that would help them feel more comfortable and build their confidence with this process, both as a sort of novice match official and also with the blue card and concussion management more broadly. And for training and support, comments and considerations around video examples, going through the process, integrating that into the level 1 training were brought up as well. Additionally, we highlighted that training should probably integrate other members of the rugby community, such as coaches and medical staff, so that the effective coordination of the concussion management following a blue card between these individuals can really be refined and improved before they have to go through that in game.
So on the back of that research that Mike did, our working group came together and looked to improve that initial pilot process. So the first thing that we did is built in an e-learning, and Jackie Tilley, who presented at this conference previously on our behalf, was the lead on that. And so now we have an e-learning available for all coaches, referees, players, anybody who's involved, and it is available to you if you're interested to take that e-learning as well. It's on the lockeroncoach.ca. We also took a look at our process. We realized that when it came to a suspected concussion and a blue card being reported, there was long delays between between the report and action being taken by the provincial union or by the member. So we updated the process to automate a lot of that system through a process mapping process. And then we launched the Blue Card. So last year, 2022 was a province-wide pilot of the Blue Card, which obviously is in line with Rowan's Law, which we've spoken about today. So what does the Blue Card look like now? So on a match day, if we go back to Dallas, Dallas has had some form of impact, signs and symptoms of a suspected concussion. In that instance, anybody on the field, whether that's a player, a coach, a fan, medical professional, administrators, whoever it is, can identify that player has a suspected concussion. At that instance, the match official will hold up a blue card and signify to everybody that Dallas now needs to be removed from the field of play and cannot return. Coaches and medical staff, people on the sidelines, people working on Dallas's team will then make sure that, first of all, they're safe, and ensure that post-game the match official has the information to submit the report. So after the match is completed, the report submitted into Sport Lomo, which is our competition and registration management system across the country. There's a few details that are included in there. Was there a sanction, a red card or yellow card? Were they a starter or replacement? Those sorts of details that'll help us to understand the types of incidents that occur in the future. And then once that report's submitted, an automatic email is sent to Dallas and to that member. So in that email, there's the graduated return to play process from World Rugby. There's also the medical assessment letter, which we've adapted from Parachute Canada, and some key points and next steps. And that notification doesn't just go to the parent of the player. It also goes to the rugby club's club welfare officer, which is a requirement for all clubs, rugby clubs in Ontario. And then it also goes to the provincial and myself as the national administrator. So once that happens, we now the information of the next steps, the medical visit happens. So Dallas will then go to their medical professional with the medical assessment letter. Once the assessment's completed, the medical assessment letter will be signed and submitted into Sport Lomo, into our registration system on the user end. That will create a notification to everybody involved that a review is requested on the status of Dallas. So what we've done here is we've made sure that Dallas can't return back to play because Dallas is currently inactive and can't come back to play until the medical assessment letter shows that they don't have a concussion. So that review process then goes to the administrator. The provincial administrator will ensure that the right level of individual has done the assessment, and then we'll update on next steps. So update Dallas's status in Sport Lomo. So if no concussion is diagnosed, the status is changed to completed, and automatically Dallas is active and can come back to the field of play. Again, an automated email is sent to the player, and then everybody involved is notified. And then we ask that in that email, the coaches that are involved, the club welfare officer, are encouraged to keep an eye on the athlete and make sure that they're safe. If there is a concussion diagnosed, the status is changed to edited. So Dallas will remain inactive and unable to be put onto a game sheet. So once the status is inactive, an automated email again gets sent with the medical clearance letter, again adapted from the Parachute Canada resources. Dallas will then go through the graduated return to play process, and again the coaches are notified and ensure that they go through the right steps to return to play. So Once the graduated return to play process is done, that medical clearance letter is then brought to the medical professional to be completed. Once signed, submitted into Dallas's user account, again back into Sport Lomo, and that then provides the notification that a review is requested again. The administrator will review the documentation, ensure that everything checks out, and it states that Dallas is cleared to play by that medical professional, and their status will be changed to completed, and will return to an active participant and be able to be put onto team sheets and compete again. So this process is very closely tied to Rowan's Law, and is driven by that process. So what happened in 2022? We saw 113 blue cards given, and I will say that this number here isn't saying that there were only 113 suspected concussions or concussions that happened in rugby in 2020, but that's what we saw through the blue card process. 59 athletes returned to play, and 54 haven't returned to play. So when we look to our next steps, understanding their experience and understanding why they've taken no action is a really important step for us. And to do so, we're working very closely with Mike to understand the experiences of those athletes, understand the experiences of the coaches and those who have been involved in this process, and get some feedback from them so that we can improve the process. We're also looking to build some resources and guidance for our rugby clubs and provincial unions. And as this is only a pilot in Ontario, those guides will help to expand this across the country. We're also, and mentioned earlier, how do we support athletes through the graduated return to play process is a question that we have. So is there a way for us to support coaches and train coaches to return athletes to the field of play safely? And then supporting our club administrators to be able to report a suspected concussion in the system outside of a match. Currently, it can only be done through a match when a game happens. If a suspected concussion happens in training or in another sport, that needs to be sent by email. So we're looking to update that process as well. And so what has this done for us? We've got a multi-layered system that involves multiple stakeholders to support people to return to play in a safe manner. We've taken an athlete-centered approach and from a stakeholder-centered approach by connecting with the match officials and really being evidence-informed by using the feedback that we're receiving. And what we found is people are connecting with the blue card. They're connecting with concussion management and the stigma that we saw previously in previous years around what a concussion is slowly being removed because people are becoming more aware. We're also connecting to different organizations and medical professionals and other sports to improve our process and ensure that rugby players are safe when they enter the game at the community level. And just to our hope here is to continue this conversation, and Mike and I have put our heads together and would love to connect and chat a little bit more about the blue card and collaborate on this. There's a QR code up on the screen if you'd like to scan, and it's just a quick form to sign up, and then we'll share a link, and we'd just like to have an open conversation, and we believe that that'll help us in moving forward, but will also help, hopefully help others as well. Just some contact details if you'd like to get in touch with either myself or Mike. And thank you very much for taking the time to listen today, and we look forward to connecting and happy to answer any questions as needed.
Okay, that was great. My gosh, Ryan, Mike, thank you so much for sharing that. I love hearing about organizations that use information to inform their programs and continue, evaluate, look at the data and change around. Now, I only have time for one question, but I know quite a few questions came in through the Q&A box, so perhaps you can have a look at that, or we can follow up with you after. But one question that I'm also wondering about is, what kind of pushback did you get from the coaches with this blue card process? If you heard of any, if you had any pushback from the coaches?
Yeah, but when we looked to roll this out, there was a widespread communication plan that we had, and we did receive a little bit of kind of uncomfortable feelings from coaches, but ultimately the blue cards wasn't anything different from what we were doing before. We always had recognize and remove in rugby. We were just adding that process on the back end, and once we were able to update the process a little bit to be a bit more automated, we found that coaches really bought in and supported us in that space. That's
great to hear. I like how you said that there was a bit of discomfort. With any change, there's always discomfort, right? But if you communicate properly, then hopefully you alleviate some of that. I can't thank you enough for joining us today. Again, we love showcasing Rugby Canada and Rugby Ontario from previous years. So thank you for taking the time and being with us.